Hey guys, it's me, and I'll just give you a lecture on like carbs and lipids because you guys probably need it. So, we already talked about proteins and nucleic acids, and honestly, we should have learned carbohydrates and lipids first because they're easier to understand. But we're gonna learn carbs and lipids today. So, carbs and lipids are another type of the macromolecules found in all living organisms. So, first of all, carbohydrates contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And since it says here it's in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, which means there's 2 times as much hydrogen as there is carbon and oxygen. And so if there was an N amount of carbohydrates, then there'd be 2 times as much hydrogen as carbon and oxygen. That's what this means. Okay, and the monomer for carbohydrates is called monosaccharide. And then this stuff isn't really important, but basically carbohydrates are used to store energy and like transport energy. Okay, so let's move on. Wait, sorry, give me a minute. Carbohydrates are always ring-shaped. So the general shape of carbohydrates looks like this. You see how there's like rings and everything? Okay. And then next, we're gonna start talking about monosaccharides. Oops, sorry. So saccharide means sweet in Greek or Greece. So like, it means simple sugars basically. Mono means one, saccharides means sugar. So it means like one sugar. And examples of monosaccharides include glucose, which is the thing we always talk about, C6H12O6, galactose, and galactose is basically found in milk, and fructose, which is found in fruits. And then all three of these are isomers. Do you guys remember what isomers are? That means they have a different structural formula, but the same empirical formula. So these guys are all C6H12O6. Okay, and then here, we're just gonna ignore that photo because it's not that important. So disaccharides is two monosaccharides joined together. Di means two, and you know saccharides. So one monosaccharide plus another monosaccharide equals a disaccharide. You see this? Remember sucrose? This over here is glucose, and this over here is fructose. Glucose is a monosaccharide, and fructose is a monosaccharide. And when you bond them together, they become sucrose, which is a disaccharide. Okay, now we're gonna talk about polysaccharides. So I'll just use my notes. So polysaccharides are used for energy and for structure, like structure of things. So these are the 4 types of polysaccharides. There's glycogen, which is used for animal energy storage, and we humans use this too. So basically, in humans, we use glycogen to store energy. And then cellulose is what gives plants their structure. Chitin is basically the sturdy material that makes up the outer shell of insects. Think like the shells of like lobsters or something. Insects or other animals. And plant starch is what plants use to store their energy. And then now we're gonna move. Oh, I almost forgot. This is extra information, but I just found it really cool. So, remember peptide bonds, the bonds that were like between proteins? Glycosidic bonds are bonds between monosaccharides to form polysaccharides. And glycosidic bonds are like a part of dehydration synthesis because like, remember the glucose and fructose bonding to make sucrose? That's a glycosidic bond, and that's dehydration synthesis. You don't need to know this stuff, but I just thought it was really cool. Okay, next we're gonna move on to lipids. So one thing you need to know about lipids is that lipids is different from the others because there isn't really a monomer for it. Cause like lipids just refers to like all the molecules that aren't soluble in water. It's like a category of the molecules that don't dissolve in water, because they're unable to form polar bonds / hydrogen bonds. Polar bonds and hydrogen bonds are like the same thing, by the way. And then, so lipids are used for long-term energy storage, which is basically fat. And you can use it for protection, and it's a key component in cell membranes. And then, so there's 4 categories of lipids that we need to know. Waxes, steroids, triglyceride, and phospholipids. The most important here that we need to know is triglyceride because it's also the most complicated, I guess. And then all 4 of these, they share the fact that they're insoluble in water because lipids are hydrophobic. Okay, so lipids are made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And there's less oxygen than carbon. And yeah, okay, so now we're going to talk about triglycerides. Triglycerides, they do have a monomer. So remember, lipids don't have a specific monomer, but triglycerides have a monomer. The monomer for triglycerides are fatty acids and glycerol. And then, so examples of triglycerides are fats and oils. So like olive oil, for example, or like fat from like pork, that's triglyceride. And the difference between fat and oil is that fat is solid at room temperature, so like butter. And then oil is liquid at room temperature. Okay, so we need to know this. This is the structure of a triglyceride. So you see this over here, this entire thing, the one over here, that's glycerol. And then these three are fatty acids. So this is 1 fatty acid, this is 2 fatty acids, and this is 3 fatty acids. You see how they're all the same? There's just 3 linked to 1 glycerol. That's the structure you need to know for triglyceride. So there's 2 kinds of triglycerides. One is saturated and one is unsaturated. So like saturated is like fat, remember butter? And then unsaturated is like oil, say like olive oil. So do you see this highlighted part, the green part, the carbon bonds, all of this? These are in saturated fats, these are all single bond. You see how there's only 1 line? Those are single bonds. So in saturated lipids, they all have 1 bond. Okay, and then in unsaturated, the difference is that there's at least 1 carbon to carbon bond that is double bond. You see that difference? This one over here, they're all single lines, and this one over here, there's a double line. And then because there's a double bond, the chain kind of bends. You see how this is like diagonal? And I'll show you a photo here. So like you see this one? So this would be unsaturated because there's a double bond over here, and due to that double bond, the chain starts curving down, like it starts slanting. Okay, and then triglycerides are formed by dehydration synthesis. So you need to know this too. Here, this is a good photo too. So you see over here, this is one of the fatty acids and this is the glycerol. So the glycerols H over here and the fatty acids HO over here, they bond, and then you take out the H2O, and then it just leaves this 1 O over here, right? So the O bonds with this. You see that? So glycerol bonds with fatty acid after the water is taken out, and it just leaves behind the oxygen. And you can see here too. You see? So this is the glycerol, and these 3 are fatty acids. So you take the OH here and the HO here, and then you take the 2 H's and the O, you take it away, you get H2O, and then you leave behind O. And since there's 3 fatty acids, you get 3 H2Os. Okay, and then now that we're done with the triglycerides, let's move on to the next lipid category. So we just talked about triglyceride. Now we're going to talk about phospholipids. Phospholipids are like, so the notes, like the PowerPoint doesn't really talk too much about it, but I feel like it's still important to know what these are. So I added these in my notes anyways. This over here is the phosphate group. Remember the phosphate group? There was also a phosphate group in another one. Remember nucleic acids? They have a phosphate group over here. And lipids, especially phospholipids, have the same thing. They have the phospholipid over here. This over here is the glycerol, which is the same thing that was over here. So this is glycerol, and these are 2 fatty acids. This over here is just that, except in triglycerides, there's 3 fatty acids. In phospholipids, there's 2 fatty acids. And the unique thing about phospholipids is that it's not entirely hydrophobic, because remember when we talked about the properties of lipids? Lipids have to be hydrophobic, right? Like they don't attract water and they don't dissolve in water. But like phospholipids have a unique case because while the 2 fatty acids are hydrophobic, but the top phosphate group is hydrophilic, which means this part attracts water, but this part doesn't attract water. And so this really strange phenomenon leads to phospholipids arranging themselves like this. So this is the head. These little circles are the phosphate groups, and then the little tails are like the fatty acids. So the fatty acids would often like face each other, and then the phosphate group would face away. And so since the outside part, which is the phosphate group, is hydrophilic, and the inside group is hydrophobic. So the inside doesn't attract water. The outside attracts water. This forms like a really cool barrier because like water can't go in, but it can't go out either. It's kind of hard to explain, but like I'll find a video for you guys to watch that goes more into detail. And then the other 2 categories of lipids aren't as important, but you should still know them too. So there's steroids and waxes. Steroids usually form this 4-carbon ring shape. So these are all carbons, right? Like the letters that aren't drawn, these are all carbons. So there's going to be 3, 6, you see how there's 3 hexagons and there's 1 pentagon? So that means there's 3 6-carbon rings and 1 5-carbon rings. And then so like different groups are attached to this basic structure to create different kinds of steroids. And the most common steroid is cholesterol. You guys might know people try to avoid cholesterol and they want to lower cholesterol, but cholesterol is important in like our human body. So like it's found in blood and nerve cells, and it's involved in making some vitamins. And then you guys might also know about testosterone and estrogen, which is male and female like hormones. That's also a type of steroid. And then the last is waxes, which is found in protective coating on leaves and other surfaces of animals. And also like bees, they create waxes, and like that's okay. Now we're done with our lesson. If you guys have any more questions, you can ask me. Thank you so much for listening.